The second Witcher animated feature is out, and it's brought to us by the fine people at Netflix, who drove what could have been one of the coolest fantasy shows ever so hard into the ground that Henry Cavill, the quintessential Witcher himself, pieced out over how badly the source material and the show were being mistreated. By the same writers who actively disliked the highly regarded writings of Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski and mocked the games that spawned one of the most beloved and successful video game franchises ever. By the same producer who, in response to this criticism, said the real reason they dropped the source material was actually because it would be too complicated for Americans, and that simplifications were necessary. And by the same showrunner slash producer who brought us the hilariously bad Witcher Blood Origins show that was more concerned with ramming every woke trope in existence into a 4 episode miniseries rather than telling a decent story, which died an ignominious death curled up in a ball of shame and bad ratings. Well, what could go wrong? At best, we could get something similar to the excellent Nightmare of the Wolf animation that came out in 2021, but that was written by the same guy who did X-Men 97 and spoke up about the disdain for good writing in the Witcher writer's room in the first place after leaving the production. No, sadly, this was written by people who worked on season 3 of The Witcher, universally regarded as the worst season, so it's probably a good bet where this thing is headed. Maybe it errs toward the bland and boring side more than the patently offensive? One can only hope. But if you were ever hoping for a reimagined musical number in the vein of Ursula from The Little Mermaid, you're in luck.
It's really scary to say, oh, we're going to have someone new come in and just start changing things in this thing that I love. What I will always say is, in general, we add to. We try not to detract from.
The Andrzej Sapkowski story this movie is based on, called A Little Sacrifice, is a reimagining of the actual Little Mermaid story by Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, published in 1837. So similarities to the classic tale are in this movie as a result of the story it's based on, but they occasionally veer away from Sapkowski's reimagining and closer to Disney territory. The story follows Geralt, investigating mysterious attacks on pearl divers in the coastal kingdom of Bremervoord. This has escalated tensions between humans and the mer people, threatening to ignite a war. Geralt eventually uncovers a forbidden romance between Prince Aglaval and the mermaid Princess Shianaz, whose love is opposed by both their realms. Complicating matters, Geralt discovers that the true culprit behind the attacks is someone a lot closer to home, as conspiracy threatens to stoke the brewing conflict and turn it into an all-out war. First, let's talk positives. Doug Cockle voices the Witcher in this, and it's great to hear Geralt's voice from the video games.
They travel in schools, but how did a sea creature know where to find us?
He's awesome as always. It really brings a lot of legitimacy to the character. Joey Beatty from The Witcher show voices Jaskier, and it works well. The main characters' voices sound appropriate and aren't distracting. The fights with the monsters like Vodniks and the battles between the humans and merpeople look decent. They're quick-paced and well-animated. Geralt uses his powers just enough and quaffs a couple potions, so that all feels appropriate for the character, like something you do in the games. The environments and backgrounds look really nice, and there are some cool large-scale battles. Visually, from a fantasy perspective, there's a lot to like. And I like the underwater setting. It's really hard to pull off a convincing movie or story in an underwater environment, but I do love that setting. And then we get to the negatives, of which there are many. While a lot of the animation looks decent, I thought the detail and characters looked better in The Nightmare of the Wolf. This one just has a flatter look overall, I thought, less flair. The merpeople designs look weirdly androgynous, really not memorable or outstanding. The Witcher is set in a dark fantasy world based on Slavic mythology. If you've ever played one of the games, you'd probably agree these merpeople don't look like anything you'd expect to see in that world. I think they really missed the tone on this, and that goes for much of this film. A lot of it just feels bland. The flow of the story isn't that exciting. The characters aren't that interesting. The overall plot feels derivative, not just by the nature of what it's based on, but the new additions as well. It's pretty uninteresting and uninspired, to be honest. There's never a moment that feels really visceral or tense. Sure, there's some blood, but there are no stakes to it. I felt oddly disengaged from the events going on in the film. There's also some language that sounds like modern messaging. The circumstances may be true in the story, but it just has that feel. Not to mention that Aglaval was changed from an overbearing, selfish duke in charge of his own realm in the short story to an ethnically diverse prince as a result of a mixed marriage, who's subject to an overbearing, and selfish father, in an apparent attempt to Disneyfy the character and thereby remove any semblance of moral complexity, while sneaking in some woke themes for good measure. And the end of the movie is definitely a modern update. This adaptation takes some significant departures from the story it's based on, including the relationship between Geralt and Essie, which is written as a sort of tragedy in the short story. But here it's much more sanitized and pushed to the background, while the war with the mer people is brought to the forefront in service of more action scenes. This departure really waters the emotional content of the story down, and results in more of that bland shallowness that covers this whole thing like a soiled blanket. Oh, and there's a musical number that feels exactly like the Ursula song in The Little Mermaid for good measure. Everything feels simplified and stripped of any emotional weight or soul it might have had if it had stuck closer to the source material. Well, this is a lot like any number of modern projects that hire substandard writers who forego the blueprint laid out for them and inject their own sensibilities into the dumbed down end product that's eventually shipped to the viewing public. A public who's a lot more capable of interpreting artistic nuance and complex motivations than you apparently give them credit for. Maybe if you aimed a little higher and started treating your viewers as intelligent consumers of sophisticated media, you might just turn out a better product. For me, this is below average, 4 out of 10. It just lacked heart. It feels like it rolls along because it has to. The dialogue is surface level, the characterizations are shallow, the plot is uninteresting, there's more than one modernism, and the world struggles to feel like something you'd see in the dark fantasy setting of The Witcher. If you've never seen Nightmare of the Wolf, go check it out. It starts a bit rocky, but once it gets going, it's pretty awesome. Feels like night and day compared to this one. Oh, and if anyone is interested in spoilers, I wanted to mention the ending. If you don't want to know, then switch off now. Alright, so in the short story, the mermaid princess gives up her fins to be on land with Duke Aglaval, hence the little sacrifice, just like the Little Mermaid. But since it's 2025 and no woman should be seen to give up anything for a man, the prince instead turns himself into a mermaid to go live with the princess, spiting his overbearing and patriarchal father in the process. Yeah, take that, Dad. I hate you. That certainly feels like the maturity level of the writers we're dealing with now.
Fuck.
Anyway, that's all I've got for now. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.